Most people in the old American frontier remembered the shy farmer as the man who kept to himself, spoke only when spoken to, and worked from sunrise to sundown on a quiet stretch of land near the cottonwoods. He lived alone after his parents passed, tending to a small farm that barely earned enough to cover the winter months. But he never complained. He found comfort in the steady rhythms of the soil, the warm breath of his horses, and the peace that came from living away from the noise of the town. Folks often said he was too gentle for the harsh frontier life. But he believed there was a place for quiet people even in a rough land like this. What no one knew was that a single evening would change his life more than all the passing seasons combined. It happened near the edge of autumn, when the wind carried a warning in its chill and the coyotes cried longer than usual. The sun was setting gold over the fields when he heard an unusual rustling behind his barn. At first he thought it was a stray horse or a raccoon, but something in the sound made him stop. It was too soft, too careful, almost like someone trying not to be found. He walked slowly, feeling his heart thump louder with each step. When he reached the barn door, he paused. A part of him wanted to ignore it and walk away. Frontier folks survived by minding their own business, but something stronger pushed him to look inside. When he opened the door just enough, the fading light fell on a figure curled behind the hay. His breath caught when he realized it was a woman. She looked tired, tense, and ready to run even in her weakened state. Her clothes were worn from travel, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes sharp like she was used to reading danger in every direction. He recognized her instantly as Apache, though he had never spoken to any Apache person in his life. He had only seen glimpses from far off when their groups traveled through the hills. She stared at him with a mixture of fear and determination, as if she was prepared to defend herself even with no strength left. He raised his hands gently and stepped back. He meant no harm and wanted her to see that. In the stillness of the barn, only the soft breathing of his horses could be heard. She hesitated before lowering her guarded posture. She looked like someone who had been running for days. She was exhausted, as if the world had chased her right into his barn. He did not ask questions. He simply fetched the water pail and set it near her without getting too close. She watched him carefully, almost suspiciously, but he stayed quiet and returned to tending his horses, giving her space. After a moment, she reached for the water and drank slowly. He noticed faint scratches on her arms and dust covering her clothing. She looked like she had lived through something heavy, something she was not ready to share. The hours passed while the sky darkened. He knew keeping her there was risky. The town had growing tension with the Apache groups, not because of any direct harm, but because fear had a way of spreading faster than truth. If anyone saw her on his property, they would make assumptions. They would blame him for things he had nothing to do with. But when he looked at her again and saw how tired she was, he could not force himself to turn her out into the cold night. He brought her bread and a blanket, placing them near the hay without looking directly at her, trying to show respect. She still said nothing, but her eyes softened a little. The shy farmer was used to silence. It never made him uncomfortable. He simply nodded and stepped outside to close the barn door gently. Letting her rest, all night he lay awake in his small cabin, wondering who she was running from and whether her people were searching for her. He knew little about Apache traditions, only the stories townsfolk shared, and most of those were distorted. He had always believed every person deserved kindness, no matter where they were from. Still, he could not deny the nervous flutter in his chest. He took a risk by helping her, but something told him he did the right thing. The next morning he brought her warm food. She accepted it quietly. After a long moment she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. She did not tell him her name, only that she was separated from her people. She did not explain how. He did not push for answers. She stayed hidden in the barn for days while he worked the fields like nothing unusual was happening. During those days, a strange bond formed between them. She helped him mend fences, gathered eggs from the chicken coop, and brushed the horses. She never stayed close, always keeping a careful distance, but he felt a sense of trust growing slowly. Her presence brought a warmth he did not realize he had been missing. The farm felt less lonely with someone else walking between the rows of corn and feeding the animals. Sometimes he caught her watching the sunrise with quiet wonder, as if it reminded her of something familiar, but even as peaceful days passed, a shadow hung over their silence. He knew she could not stay forever. The Apache woman often looked toward the hills with longing, like she was listening for a voice she hoped to hear again. He understood the feeling of belonging to a place or people, and he knew she was not meant to live in hiding. Every night he wrestled with the same thoughts, wondering if helping her leave would bring trouble to his door or danger to her path. One afternoon, she approached him with a seriousness he had not seen before. She told him she needed to return to her people. Her voice held gratitude but also worry, as if saying the words caused her pain. He felt a pinch in his chest, like something inside him resisted the idea of her walking away. But he only nodded and told her he understood. He packed food for her journey and offered his old horse to carry her part of the way. She refused the horse but accepted the food with a gentle glance that lingered longer than usual. Before she left, she looked at him as if memorizing his face. The shy farmer, who rarely spoke more than a few sentences a day, found himself wanting to say something meaningful, something that showed how much her presence mattered in such a short time. But the words stayed locked inside. She stepped away with a soft expression that carried both sadness and thanks. He watched her walk toward the hills until she disappeared among the trees. The farm felt strangely empty without her. The quiet felt heavier, as if the land had lost a heartbeat it recently discovered. He returned to his chores, but everything reminded him of her, from the blanket she folded neatly before leaving to the way the horses paused at the barn door, as if waiting for her return. Days turned into weeks. He tried to push the memory aside, focusing on the harvest and repairs the farm needed before winter. But something deep within him wondered if she had reached her people safely. He often looked toward the hills at sunset, feeling an unexpected ache of longing. He never imagined a shy farmer like him could miss someone so strongly. Then one cold morning, while the sky still held the pale colors of dawn, the ground trembled faintly as if hooves were approaching. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on his worn jacket, and froze when he saw a group emerging from the tree line. Apache riders. Many of them. His breath tightened. He had no idea why they came to his quiet farm or what they wanted. His heart pounded as he counted their silhouettes. Trying to steady himself, at the front of the group rode the woman he had helped. She looked stronger now, confident, and surrounded by people who seemed to hold her in great respect. She stepped down from her horse with calm steps and walked toward him with eyes that carried a new purpose, and before he could speak or even understand what was happening, her people gathered behind her while she stood before him with a steady gaze, preparing to say something that would change his life more than the night she first hid in his barn. The shy farmer stood frozen as the Apache riders drew their horses to a stop near the edge of his yard. The chill of the early morning wrapped around him, but the deeper cold came from uncertainty. He had spent weeks wondering what became of the woman he hid in his barn, never imagining she would return like this or with her people beside her. The land felt strangely quiet, as if the cottonwoods were holding their breath to see what would happen next. He gripped the side of his coat, feeling the rough fabric grounding him against the rush of nerves rising inside. The Apache woman stepped closer, studying him with steady eyes that carried a new strength. When she had stayed in his barn, she was tired and cautious, carrying the weight of someone who had wandered too far alone. Now she seemed rooted, sure of her place again, surrounded by riders who trusted her. Even so, there was a softness when she looked at him. A kind of understanding formed from the quiet moments they shared on the farm. But he could not guess why she brought her people here or what they expected from him. He tried to find words, but nothing came out. The leader of the riders, an older man with calm eyes, glanced at him as if measuring his character. The shy farmer felt small under the gaze of so many, wishing he had even a hint of what they planned to say. His heart beat harder with each passing second. The woman finally raised her hand slightly, signaling to her people. They remained on their horses but relaxed their reins, showing they meant no harm. She turned back to the farmer and spoke in a quiet voice, one that felt familiar and new at the same time. She thanked him for helping her when she needed it most. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. He nodded, still unsure what to say. Helping her had felt natural, almost necessary, even though fear had troubled him afterward. Hearing her acknowledge it eased something deep inside him. But the tension around them remained. She then explained that she had told her people what happened, how she had found shelter in his barn and how he showed her kindness without asking anything in return. Her people respected such acts, especially toward someone who was alone and far from home. The older man, who appeared to be a respected figure among them, stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority. He said they came to repay the farmer in a way their tradition valued. The farmer's pulse quickened. Unsure what form that repayment could take, he tried to respond, but the words tangled. His mouth felt dry as he admitted he did not expect anything. He said he only did what any decent person would do. Some riders exchanged glances, not mocking him but surprised by his sincerity. The woman softened in her expression, as if his simple honesty reaffirmed what she had told them. The leader continued speaking, explaining that they believed in recognizing those who acted with integrity on the frontier. Their world had long been shadowed by misunderstanding with settlers, yet this farmer had shown a form of goodwill rare between the two sides. They wanted to honor that. He stepped aside, letting the woman come forward again. She held herself with a confidence she did not have when she hid in his barn. She looked at the farmer with a seriousness that made his stomach tighten. She explained that, according to their custom, a woman could present a request in the presence of her people if she felt a bond worth acknowledging. He felt heat rise in his chest as her words lingered in the cool morning air. He did not know what she would say, but the tone had shifted into something deeper, something delicate and unfamiliar to him, before she could speak further. One of the younger riders spotted movement in the distance, and the group grew alert. The farmer turned to see dust rising from the road toward town. A wagon approached, carrying two men known for their loud opinions and suspicious nature. They often believed trouble was hiding behind every new encounter on the land. The shy farmer knew that if they saw Apache riders on his property, misunderstandings could spread through town faster than prairie winds. His chest tightened. He did not want conflict, nor did he want anyone to think poorly of the woman or her people. He motioned discreetly toward the barn, urging them to shift closer to the side where the wagon would not see them clearly. The woman understood quickly and signaled her riders. They guided their horses behind the cottonwoods, staying hidden but alert. The farmer stood at the edge of his porch, trying to look as calm as the sunrise paint on the horizon. The wagon rolled up, and the two men offered stiff greetings. Their eyes scanned the yard in suspicion. They asked if he heard anything unusual recently, claiming someone reported movement near the hills. He shrugged and said he had been focused on his fields, keeping his voice steady. The men looked around again, clearly wanting to pry, but found nothing to support their curiosity. After a few more questions, they left, still muttering their concerns. The farmer remained still until the wagon disappeared over the ridge. When he turned back, the Apache riders emerged again. The woman stepped toward him, her expression carrying a quiet mix of gratitude and urgency. She knew, just as he did, that encounters like the one they avoided could grow into trouble if rumors spread. The old American frontier was full of tension between groups who barely understood one another, and he had just risked more than he ever expected. The leader nodded at him with a thoughtful look. It was clear they understood he had shielded them. The woman stepped closer and lowered her voice. She said she had returned not only to thank him and not only because of tradition, but because her people believed a connection formed between them during her stay. A connection that should not be ignored. The farmer felt a pull in his chest. He had been lonely for years, living a life of quiet routines and silent evenings. When she stayed in his barn, even in her guarded state, her presence brought a warmth he never imagined. Her stillness, her way of watching the sunrise, her careful movements as she helped gather eggs or mend small things around the farm, all of it stayed with him long after she left. Hearing that her people felt something meaningful existed between them unsettled him, but also stirred something gentle. But he also feared misunderstanding. He knew the frontier towns could twist stories, turning quiet moments into something they were not. and he wondered if she truly wanted whatever her people expected, or if she felt obligated because of their customs. He could not read her easily. She seemed both open and reserved, like someone learning how to step into two different worlds and unsure where to place her feet. She explained that when she rejoined her people, she realized the safety and warmth she felt in his barn mattered more than she expected. She said she thought of the quiet mornings watching him work, the way he gave her space, the respect he showed without knowing her language or customs. Her people saw her sincerity and supported her decision to come back. But the decision she carried was larger than he ever imagined. Before she could finish, the leader raised his voice gently, speaking to the entire group. He said the journey they took to reach the farmer's land was not one made lightly. It was taken with full intention, guided by the belief that bonds formed in hardship should be honored. The shy farmer felt his knees weaken slightly. He sensed what direction the words were moving toward, yet he could not fully grasp it. The woman looked at him again, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the rising sun. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar along her wrist and the determination behind her calm expression. She told him she had come with a question that carried the weight of her people's support. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the seriousness of what she was about to say. The riders behind her watched carefully, their presence steady but patient. The shy farmer felt as if the entire frontier paused, as if the wide open land pressed quiet around them. He stood there, hands stiff, heart pounding in his chest as she drew in a slow breath. He sensed the question forming, something that would change the rhythm of his life as strongly as the day she first stepped into his barn. She lifted her chin gently, preparing to speak the words that would shift everything, leaving him with no idea whether he should fear the answer or hope for it more than anything he ever wanted. The woman stood before the shy farmer with the weight of her people behind her, her voice ready to shape the story of both their lives. But before she spoke the final words, something flickered in her expression. A hesitation, a breath, a sign that whatever she was about to ask would draw them into a conflict much larger than either of them expected. The farmer felt the tension gather around them like a tightening rope. The land seemed to still, waiting for the moment to drop. She lowered her gaze for just a moment, steadying herself, then looked back up at him. Her voice carried a quiet sincerity when she said her people believed in honoring the bonds between those who showed mercy and those who received it. She added that her heart pointed her in his direction, even when she was far from his land. Her words warmed him, yet they also pulled him into an unfamiliar world. He had lived most of his life avoiding attention, avoiding conflict, avoiding anything that might disrupt the simple rhythm of farm life. Now a woman surrounded by her people was speaking of a bond he never expected to form, but before she could say the rest, one of the riders at the back clicked his tongue sharply. The entire group turned their attention toward the distant ridge. The shy farmer followed their eyes and saw a column of dust rising again. Not a wagon this time, horses, at least 4. Riding fast. His stomach tightened. Riders from town often went out early to scout land or check herds, but these horses moved with urgency. And if they saw Apache riders gathered on his property, the situation could twist into something dangerous before anyone had the chance to explain. The leader of the Apache group narrowed his eyes. He spoke quietly to the woman, who nodded and signaled her people to step back into the shadows of the cottonwoods again. They did so without panic, but the tension around them grew. The shy farmer stood where he was, trying to look calm even as fear crawled up his spine. He did not want any misunderstanding to start trouble. The frontier was filled with uneasy peace, thin as the dried branches that snapped beneath boots. The approaching riders stopped at a distance, scanning the land. The farmer recognized one of them as a man who owned a ranch 2 miles away, someone known for his strong opinions about the Apache groups. The other riders were younger, restless, and always ready to follow the loudest voice. They rode closer, stopping near the fence line. The rancher called out, asking if the farmer had seen anything unusual again. His tone was sharper this time, as if rumors from town had stirred him up. The shy farmer swallowed hard and said he had not seen anything out of the ordinary. He kept his voice even, though his heart was beating fast. The rancher eyed him skeptically. He claimed someone spotted movement near the hills that looked like Apache riders. He demanded to know if the farmer heard anything during the early hours. The air felt heavier with each question. The farmer kept his answers short, focused on his chores and his fields. The riders murmured among themselves, feeling the edge of suspicion. The rancher stared at the ground near the barn, noticing tracks he could not easily identify. The farmer tried to mask his worry, stepping in front of the man's line of sight. He said the tracks belonged to his own horses, which wasn't entirely false. He hoped his voice sounded confident, even though it trembled inside him. After several tense moments, the rancher finally pulled his reins and signaled for his men to follow. They rode off, though not fully convinced. Their eyes lingered long enough to make the farmer's stomach twist. Once they disappeared down the ridge, the Apache riders came forward again, moving with silent caution. The leader looked at the farmer with a thoughtful but heavy expression. The woman stepped closer, her voice quiet with concern. She knew the encounter had increased the risk for everyone involved. Her people trusted her, but the frontier town did not trust anything unfamiliar. She explained that tension between the ranchers and her people had been growing, not from direct conflict, but from fear and stories passed around without truth. The farmer nodded, understanding more than he wished he did. People in town often spoke loudly about dangers. They never experienced themselves. The woman looked toward the ridge where the riders disappeared. She said her return carried meaning, but it also carried consequences. Her people approached his land openly, guided by tradition and trust. But the town saw movement as a threat. The farmer realized the situation was no longer just about him hiding a woman in his barn. It was about two worlds trying to find a bridge where fear kept building fences. The leader then spoke, offering more context. The woman had not simply gone missing before she found the farmer's barn. She left her people because she disagreed with an internal decision they made about a trade agreement with settlers who did not keep their word. She argued for peace, believing the frontier did not need more hostility. But some in her group felt she was too trusting of people who did not understand their ways. Her departure caused concern, but also quiet division. When she returned after her time at the farm, she carried a new understanding. Strengthened by her experience with the shy farmer, the farmer listened with a mixture of admiration and unease. She had carried a burden he never imagined, and somehow she trusted him enough to share it. But he also understood the weight her words carried among her people. She had a voice that mattered. A voice that influenced decisions. If she was choosing to stand beside him, it meant her people saw something important in that choice. But the tension between the town and her people lingered like a gathering storm. The woman sensed it too. She spoke of hearing whispers in her village that some feared the settlers were preparing restrictions that would limit where Apache families could travel or gather. Such restrictions would only increase pressure. Her people wanted peace, but they also wanted to protect their way of life. This conflict made her decision to return with her people even more delicate. The shy farmer felt pulled into a world larger than the rows of corn he tended every day. His quiet life looked different now, shaped by forces he never expected to face. He found himself caring deeply about what happened next, not just for his own safety but for hers. Then the woman finally began to speak. The words she had tried to say before the interruption. She explained that her people believed in connections formed during hardship and trust built in silence. She said she felt something at the farm she could not forget. Her stay in the barn showed her that kindness existed beyond familiar borders. She believed that a union between her and the shy farmer would strengthen the possibility of peace between their worlds. It was a symbolic step, but also a personal one. He felt breathless hearing it. Not because he didn't feel something back, but because the weight of the choice scared him. He had not lived a life of grand decisions. He lived in the background of the frontier, unnoticed, untroubled. And now he was standing at the center of something that could shape how two communities saw one another. Before he could respond, the ground shifted again. Another rider appeared in the distance. A lone figure this time, riding quickly toward the rancher's land. The Apache leader narrowed his eyes. He sensed danger in the way the rider pushed the horse so hard. The shy farmer felt a coldness settle over him. Trouble was coming, stirred by fear, by rumors. By the rancher who did not trust anything unfamiliar, the woman stepped closer to the farmer, her voice lowering. She said whatever choice he made, they needed to be prepared for a confrontation that had nothing to do with her traditional question. Tension between the town and her people was rising faster than expected. The next hours or days could shift everything. The shy farmer stood there, breath unsteady, realizing he was caught between two worlds that were both moving toward a breaking point. And he still had to decide how to answer the questions she had not yet finished asking. What he chose would shape more than his own future. It could shape the fragile peace between land, people, and the quiet hope growing between them, and the conflict that waited on the horizon was coming faster than either of them could stop. The shy farmer stood with the woman beside him, both watching the lone rider disappear over the rise in the direction of the rancher's land. The cold morning had softened into a pale daylight, yet nothing about the air felt warm. It felt tight, heavy, as if the land knew a storm of misunderstanding was about to break across it. The Apache leader remained calm, but the riders behind him shifted with quiet unease. The farmer felt the pressure settle on his chest like a weight he had never carried before. Every direction felt uncertain. Every path felt steep. The woman stood close enough that he could hear the steady rhythm of her breathing. She looked toward the hills, toward the far trails her people traveled, and then toward the road that led back to town. She understood better than anyone how fragile the frontier peace was. One frightened rancher, one quick rumor, one misread gathering could turn into more trouble than either side anticipated. The farmer swallowed hard, not because he feared her people, but because he feared how quickly fear itself could spread among settlers. The leader stepped forward and told the farmer that they needed to prepare for something much more delicate than a personal decision. He said the town's reaction mattered, and the farmer's place in the center of it mattered even more. He explained they came in respect, in openness, and in hope. But if the ranchers believed the meeting was a threat, every intention would be twisted in the wrong direction. The woman listened with a solemn expression. She knew the risk too well. The farmer felt torn between two worlds moving toward a possible clash. He looked at the woman, the one whose presence had changed his quiet life so deeply. Her eyes held both determination and worry. She wanted to stand beside him, but she did not want harm to come to either side. She told him they could not simply slip away now. If they hid, the ranchers would assume the worst. If they stood openly, they risked being misunderstood. She said the only path forward was to face the situation with honesty. Even if it felt uncomfortable, he tried to gather courage, but fear tugged at him. He was not a leader or a loudspeaker. He was just a shy farmer with a small barn, a field of weathered crops, and a quiet nature that never demanded attention. Yet now he was expected to speak for peace, for understanding, for a bond he did not yet fully understand but felt growing stronger with each breath. The leader suggested they move their horses behind the barn, not to hide, but to avoid startling anyone who might approach. It was a gesture of caution and respect. The woman stayed by the farmer's side, watching him carefully as though trying to read the turmoil in his thoughts. She gently placed her hand on the fence, grounding herself as she waited for his next step. He walked toward the front of the yard, staring at the long road leading back to the ranches. The silence around him felt charged. Every rustle of the wind seemed louder. Every creak of the barn seemed sharper. He knew he needed to be calm, but the truth was he had never faced anything like this before. He was used to fixing broken fences, not misunderstandings between entire communities. As they stood there, the Apache woman spoke softly, telling him more about her return. She explained that when she was separated from her people, she felt a loss she had carried in silence. But the kindness he offered brought her a sense of steadiness she had not felt in a long time. Even though she barely knew him then, his quiet nature made her feel safe. She realized later that her choice to return to him was not decided overnight. It grew from the small moments, the unspoken trust, The respect he offered without expecting anything back, her words tightened something in his chest. He remembered how she moved around the barn, how she cared for the horses, how she would step into the fields at sunrise to watch the light spread over the land. He remembered the gentle strength she carried even when she was tired. And he remembered how lonely his life felt after she left. Hearing that she carried those same memories made the situation feel even more fragile and precious. Before he could respond, one of the Apache riders returned from scouting the ridge. He reported that more horses were gathering near the rancher's property. It was not clear whether they planned to come to the farm, but the tension was rising fast. The leader nodded slowly, understanding the danger. He turned to the farmer and woman, saying they needed to decide how to approach the situation before the ranchers did. The woman stepped closer to the farmer, speaking quietly. She said her people did not want conflict. They wanted to stand in respect. But they could not control how the settlers interpreted their presence. She looked at him with steady eyes, silently asking what he felt in his heart. Not just about the situation, but about everything. He opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden sound interrupted them. The distant thunder of hooves echoed across the hills. This time it was unmistakable. More riders were coming, quick, determined. The farmer felt his pulse rush. The Apache riders stiffened but did not reach for anything. They simply prepared themselves mentally for whatever conversation or confrontation awaited. The farmer stepped forward, feeling the woman close behind. The Apache leader placed a calming hand on her shoulder, not to stop her but to reassure her. The shy farmer breathed deeply, trying to summon a strength he had. Buried under years of living quietly, he knew the ranchers would expect him to stand on their side. Simply because he lived on their land and looked like them. They expected him to fear the Apache visitors. But he felt something different. Something true? Something he could not deny. The hooves drew closer. Dust rose in the distance like a warning cloud. The farmer stood tall, even though his legs trembled slightly. He needed to be a bridge, even if he was unsure how. He needed to protect the woman who trusted him and the people who came in peace. And he needed to calm the ranchers who might believe they were riding into danger. The woman whispered that she would stand behind him, but he shook his head gently. He said they needed to stand side by side, not hidden behind one another. She paused at his words, surprise flickering across her eyes. It was the first sign of confidence she had seen from him. Clear and steady, the Apache riders formed a respectful line behind their leader. Their posture remained calm, showing no sign they meant harm. The farmer stood beside the woman at the front, both staring toward the approaching figures. The tension twisted tighter with every passing second. The riders finally appeared, their silhouettes growing clearer as they neared the fence line. The rancher led them, face set with suspicion and determination. He raised a hand for his men to slow. They trotted into the farmer's yard, stopping several yards away. Their horses stamped the ground. Sensing the charged air, the rancher narrowed his eyes at the farmer, then at the Apache group behind him. He asked what this gathering meant and why the group had returned. His voice carried distrust, concern, and the weight of stories shaped by fear. The farmer swallowed hard and prepared to speak, feeling the Apache woman's presence beside him like a source of quiet courage. The Apache leader stood tall behind them, ready to speak if needed, but letting the farmer take the first step. The rancher demanded answers, insisting that the safety of the town came first. The farmer knew that to the rancher, the sight of Apache riders on his land looked like a threat rather than a gesture of peace. But he also knew that silence or hesitation would only deepen the misunderstanding. He took a breath, feeling the old wooden boards of the porch under his boots. This was the moment all the tension had been building toward. Everything depended on how he handled what came next, and as he stepped forward, ready to speak the truth of what brought the Apache woman back to him and why her people stood behind her, the air around them grew still, as if every voice on the land had fallen silent to hear what would happen next. The shy farmer stood in front of the ranchers with the Apache woman beside him, both steady despite the tension that pressed against the morning air. The Apache riders waited behind them in calm silence, their leader watching closely but respectfully, leaving the first words to the farmer. The rancher narrowed his eyes, clearly expecting trouble or an explanation that proved his worries right. But instead, the shy farmer took a slow breath and spoke with a clarity he didn't know he carried. He explained that the Apache woman had come to his land months ago seeking safety. Not conflict. Not advantage. Only shelter. He said she had been alone, exhausted, worn from traveling. He told the ranchers that he helped her because it was the right thing to do. Not because he joined sides or broke loyalty, but because kindness was something the frontier needed more of. The rancher's expression wavered slightly. Though suspicion still lived in the tight line of his jaw, the farmer continued, saying the Apache group came today in gratitude, not to challenge the town or harm anyone. They arrived openly, without hiding, because they wanted honesty to guide the conversation. He gestured gently to the Apache leader, who stepped forward but kept his hands visible to show calm. The leader spoke with steady words, explaining they respected the land and had no intention of bringing unrest. He said they valued the farmer's quiet courage and came because their people believed trust should be honored, not feared. The ranchers listened, their uncertainty wavering with each passing moment. The younger riders watched the Apache group with nervous eyes, but they sensed the sincerity in the way the leader spoke. No weapons raised, no threats in their voices. Only respect. The Apache woman then stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. She said she returned not only because of tradition, but because she felt a bond with the farmer that grew stronger in her heart with each step she took away from his land. She thought deeply before returning, knowing it would bring questions and risk. But she believed in the goodness she saw in him. She believed in peace more than fear. And her people supported her choice. The ranchers stared at the farmer, waiting to hear his voice again. He hesitated for a moment, feeling every eye on him. He had lived quietly for years, never used to being the center of attention. But now he spoke with a soft strength. He said the woman meant something to him. He said her presence changed him, made him see how lonely he had been, and how much hope could grow when two people from different worlds trusted each other. He said her people stood with honor, not threat, and he hoped the ranchers would see the truth instead of old fears. A silence stretched across the yard, long enough for the wind to rustle through the cottonwoods. The rancher's face slowly shifted. The hardness in his eyes softened. He glanced between the farmer and the Apache group, realizing no tension existed except the one he carried from stories and warnings passed down. Finally, he lowered his shoulders and said he believed the farmer. He admitted fear had ruled his thoughts more than reason. He said the frontier was difficult enough without creating trouble where none existed. The younger riders relaxed their reins, watching the shift in their leader's tone. The rancher nodded toward the Apache leader and said they didn't need conflict. They only needed respect on both sides. Relief washed over the farm like gentle, warm light. The Apache leader offered a respectful nod in return, saying their people only wished for the same. The tension that hung around them began to loosen, replaced by a quiet understanding that change could grow even in unfamiliar soil with the danger eased. The ranchers turned their horses and departed, leaving the yard calm once again. The shy farmer stood in a breath of stillness, feeling the weight lift from his chest. The Apache woman slowly turned to him, her eyes soft with gratitude and something deeper he felt without needing to name. Her people stepped forward, forming a small circle around them. The leader spoke gently, saying their visit had one more purpose. The woman looked down for a moment, then met the farmer's eyes with a quiet courage. She finally voiced the question she had carried with her since returning. She asked if he would consider standing beside her not only as a sign of gratitude, but as a partner. A union that could bring two worlds closer. A promise born from trust, kindness, and quiet strength. The farmer felt his breath catch. He thought of the mornings she watched the sunrise from his fields, the gentle way she cared for his horses, the silence they shared in the barn, and the warmth that filled the place after she left. He thought of the life he lived before her arrival, a life that was peaceful but empty. The decision felt clear not because tradition asked it, but because his heart did. He stepped closer, speaking carefully, humbly. He said he would be honored to stand beside her, not out of obligation but out of choice, out of hope. out of the feeling that her footsteps completed a path he never realized. He was walking alone, her expression softened into a gentle smile, the kind that carried gratitude and relief. Her people nodded in approval, pleased that both hearts chose freely. It wasn't a dramatic moment filled with loud celebration. It was quiet, sincere, rooted in the soft soil of understanding that stretched across two very different worlds. The Apache leader placed a hand on the farmer's shoulder, saying they welcomed the connection and the future it might bring. The shy farmer felt warmth spread through him, deeper than anything he'd experienced in years. The woman reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. Feeling her strength and steadiness meet his own. In the days that followed, word spread gently through the town. The rancher who once feared the Apache riders now spoke of the calm he witnessed, easing worries before they could grow. The townsfolk were curious, but the farmer's quiet nature and honesty helped them see the situation differently. And the Apache people, respecting the land's delicate harmony, visited the farm at peaceful intervals. Building a bridge where suspicion once stood, the farmer and the woman worked side by side, tending to crops, caring for animals, and building a life shaped by trust. Her presence brought color to his days. His steady nature gave her comfort. They spoke of dreams that stretched beyond the hills and of hope that rested gently on every sunrise. Together they blended the rhythms of frontier life with the traditions of her people. The barn where she once hid became a place of laughter and warmth. The fields that once felt lonely now echoed with shared steps and shared stories. Neighbors noticed the change in the farmer, the lightness in his eyes, and the sense of purpose that guided him. They found themselves respecting the woman too, drawn to her wisdom, her strength, and her kindness. As seasons passed, peace grew stronger between the town and the Apache families near the hills. Not from grand agreements or signed papers, but from the simple truth that two people found each other and proved that fear could be replaced by understanding. The shy farmer often stood at the edge of his porch at sunset, the woman beside him, both watching the horizon stretch wide and calm. They knew challenges would come, as all lives carried them, but they also knew they had built something strong enough to weather storms. Their story became a quiet reminder across the frontier that kindness could change the course of days. Trust could bridge distances, and love could grow even where uncertainty once ruled. Together they walked forward, their hands entwined, shaping a shared future grounded in respect, peace, and the gentle, steady kind of love that made the old American land feel a little more hopeful than before.